And we are here in sunny St. Louis, Missouri, campaigning for Brits abroad.
Welcome to the Liberal Democrats abroad.
We're campaigning for British nationals in Europe and around the world.
Local parties are working much more effectively as Lib Dems abroad.
We're the only party that has representation in Parliament for Brits living abroad.
In the House of Lords, whether you live in Europe or overseas, we'll look after your interests.
We're supporting British and European businesses, working together to overcome the Brexit hurdles they face.
Our scientists and engineers are world class, and we want to see them collaborating with our European friends.
Campaigning for overseas constituencies.
Pensioners abroad have been abandoned with their pensions frozen. We are working to put that right.
There are hundreds of Lib Dem members, supporters and sympathisers. We need to do our best to support them.
Working in hotspots like Afghanistan.
Come to our stand to talk about unlocking the potential of the millions of Britons living abroad who are soon to get the vote again.
Have a great day!
Hi, my name's Elle, I'm Chair of the Young Liberals, and this is what we do.
Good evening, conference, and welcome to F33, Supporting Hospitality, Retail and Leisure in the Face of Omicron, which you'll find on page 82 of the agenda. There is one amendment, which can be found on page 85A of the agenda, and in a break with tradition for this conference, there are no procedural motions. You'll be very glad to know. Please restrain yourselves. Resist the temptation to call for one during the debate. I will be eternally grateful. I now ask Janie Little to please stand by, and I call Sarah Olney MP to propose the motion. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chris. I shall restrain myself from asking for a procedural motion. I am pleased to bring to conference this motion on supporting hospitality, retail and leisure in the face of Omicron. Now, obviously, conference deadlines being what they are, we drafted this motion at a time when Omicron was still very much on everybody's minds and causing a huge disruption. And it might be that you think, well, you know, Omicron is gone now and you know, things are getting back to normal. But I think what this motion really reflects is that certainly in the last week, we've started to see another strong increase in case numbers, and we're starting to see an uptick in hospitalization. And hospitality, retail, leisure, and our cultural industries are really vulnerable. Have been really vulnerable during the lockdown and the pandemic. And I think this motion is actually as important now as it was when we drafted it back at the beginning of the year, because we've not seen from the government since December, when Omicron was first threatening hospitality businesses everywhere. We've not seen any new ideas come forward, any new plan, any long-term plan for how to deal with these kinds of threats in the future. And I've been speaking to representatives from the events industry, for example, and they're saying, please, can we have a clear set of plans? Can we have a clear understanding of the risks? Can we have a way of managing our risks, and can we please have a commitment to no more lockdowns? And of course, the government are not in the position to make that commitment, much as they have been shouting about it. And I think there'll be a number of business owners in the hospitality sector who'll be looking at those case numbers inching up with a real degree of concern. And I was out and about in my constituency on Friday, and I was speaking to Eduardo, who runs the Richmond legend that is Don Fernando's, just next to Richmond Station on the high street there. Now, Don Fernando's is actually closing at the end of March after 31 years of providing excellent Spanish food to the residents of Richmond, and most of who are utterly devastated to learn that that's the case. And I spoke to Eduardo on Friday, and it's a number of different factors. It is, of course, the hit to income that took place during the lockdown. It's the rent. Primarily, it's the rent that he wasn't able to negotiate with his landlord. It's the business rates now coming up. It's the VAT that now needs paying. It's the increased cost of supplies, particularly some of the specialist food coming in from Spain, and that's much more difficult to get now that we've had Brexit. It's the lack of staff. It's really hard to get trained staff. Real shortage of labour. So although bookings are now coming back strongly, and Eduardo is able to fill his restaurant every night, it's simply not enough for him to be able to continue his business. And we're seeing that kind of story all over the leisure, hospitality, retail sectors, and of course cultural and tourist sectors as well. And these are key sectors for the British economy, not least as a tourist destination. And as international travel comes back, we need a strong offering to our international visitors, both in our cultural and hospitality sectors. But our hospitality businesses deliver so much to our town centres, to local employment, to all sorts of flexible employment for people who are trying to combine work with family responsibilities, and all sorts of other things. So supporting our hospitality retail sectors is so important, and that's what this motion is looking to address. The fact that the government don't have a long-term plan, they haven't thought about how they will support these crucial sectors if there is a requirement for a future lockdown. And that's those are the proposals that we're making in this motion that we think will help those really important town centre businesses, and of course such a crucial point, a crucial sector for entrepreneurs who want to start up their own businesses. So what are we calling for? We're calling for the emergency 5% rate of VAT to be reinstated. We're calling for the 100% business rates relief to be to be reinstated for those businesses through to June 2022, partly to manage any future disruption. As I say, we might still see that, but also just to help those businesses who've taken a big hit over Christmas when Omicron was there, to help them to get back up on their feet. The government have got a 1.5 billion business rates relief fund, which they set up for firms that don't qualify for the full business rates relief, and they haven't spent it. And I'm seeing in my constituency casework so many businesses in the supply chain for hospitality businesses who didn't qualify for the business rates relief but could make good use of that business rates relief fund. We're really concerned ever off work, and it's going to make it increasingly difficult to manage spread if people who are being testing positive for COVID cannot afford to stay home. So it's really, really important that we take this opportunity now to finally sort out statutory sick pay. We want to see better solutions to deal with things like ventilation, for example, and how can businesses properly address some of the issues that the need to manage spread has thrown up. We need to see more about staff shortages, and we've spoken elsewhere in this conference about Ukrainian refugees, not just Ukrainian refugees, still refugees from Afghanistan and Syria. They're being prevented from working, and we have a labour shortage in this country. It doesn't make any sense at all. What the events and hospitality industries above all need is clear guidance. What's safe, what isn't, what can you still do, what stops the spread, what's okay to continue doing. That was really lacking back in December. Businesses were very much thrown to the wolves almost, and people made their own decisions. They changed their own behaviour, and they stayed away en masse at a critical time for businesses. We need much, much better, more focused guidance, both for businesses and individuals, should we face a similar situation. And finally, one of the things that's really important to me is I find that the government are prevented from taking more robust action simply because of the amount of fraud and loss we've experienced through some of the schemes that were set up to get us through COVID. We've seen 5 billion lost through the bounce back loan scheme, a similar amount through the CJRS, the furlough scheme. And what we really need to see the government doing is a lot more to try and to reclaim some of that money, to crack down on fraud, so that we don't see in the future honest businessmen, well-run businesses having to lose out because there's no money left or not enough resources left in the government's coffers due to the amount they've lost through fraud and error. So that's something else that's included in this motion. So these are the things that we think will support businesses. As I say, there is every reason to think that COVID, we're not through COVID yet. And what we really need to see is a long-term plan and real strategic thinking from the government as to how we might support our really strategic businesses, our town centre businesses, our entrepreneur-run businesses, our SMEs, and those providing key employment to people who otherwise find themselves shut out of employment. We really need to support those businesses, and the government needs a better plan, and that is what this motion is designed to deliver. Thank you, conference.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I now ask Andrew Emerson to please stand by, and I call Janie Little to propose Amendment 1. Janie.
Thank you. The hospitality industry is a huge employer of young people who face a much higher unemployment rate than the national average, so I'd like to thank Sarah on behalf of the Young Liberals for bringing this motion today. I will also take a moment to highlight the fantastic presence of the Young Liberals during this conference. Huge congratulations go to Tom Campion and Alexandra Kimmins for moving our motion on criminal records earlier today, and I'm delighted that conference passed it. I send out my thanks as well to every Young Liberal who has spoken in a debate, been on our booth, run a training session, participated in a fringe, worked behind the scenes, and so much more. I am so proud of everything we've achieved. Our amendment proposes the introduction of preferential duty rates for draft beer. This policy was brought onto the YL policy book by James Bliss, a former Young Liberals policy officer, which is the role I now hold, and current hospitality sector employee. And I thank him for his work on both this specific issue and for his work on hospitality industry policy more broadly. As Lib Dems, we love a pub, and beer duty in its current form is damaging our pubs. Beer duty is far too high and leads to burdensome costs for our pubs. Pubs which do so much for jobs and the local economy and the national economy and for our communities. Beer duty is currently only determined by the strength of the beer's alcohol content. There's no differential system based on the container. But research by Europe Economics, commissioned by the Campaign for Real Ale, has illustrated that a cut in duty rate for on-trade draft beer would lead to much greater sales in pubs due to drinks being cheaper. For example, they found that a 5% reduction would lead to 4.5 million litres more in sales. In turn, this leads to an increase in jobs, particularly benefiting those young people, given that the industry is such a large employer of people of my age group. Not only that, but it would encourage drinking in pubs, which is a safer environment to drink alcohol in, due to the staff presence and the supervision there. That safer social environment can reduce the chances of overconsumption and keep those consumers safe. More sales, more jobs, and cheaper pints. What more could you want? This is a fantastic policy solution to the monumental crisis in the hospitality industry. We know the value of pubs not just to our economy, but also to our local communities. The hospitality industry and its staff have suffered horrendously during lockdown and under ongoing restrictions and uncertainty. We have to take action to stop the rapid rates of pub closures and to support the industry, given everything that it does for our communities. I thank Sarah again for moving this motion, and I encourage conference to please vote for both this amendment and for the motion as a whole to save our pubs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janie. I now ask Naomi Taylor to please stand by, and I call Andrew Emerson, who's speaking in favour of lines 108 to 115.
Thank you. I come before you to speak wholly in favour of a motion for the very first time, and that is those lines, as mentioned, 108 to 114, which particularly cover the raising and extending of statutory sick pay. My background in this is that for 6 months of the pandemic at the very start and quite a considerable time before, I worked for ACAS, who provide impartial employment law advice. I saw firsthand, working in that job, giving employment law advice of 40 hours a week, the number of people who came to us in dire straits because SSP was paltry, and the devastation and the problems that caused. So when I was thinking about this speech, it transported me back to the beginning of the pandemic, to about the March period, where nearly every call that we took was people terrified to head to work because of the pandemic. People were terrified and wanted to support their families, their friends, their colleagues, but they knew financially if they took ill, if they decided to take time off in aid of that protection, then they were going to be financially punished and at a financial detriment at a really uncertain period. Now, every day, I was dealing with people who were tired, who were frustrated, who were crying, and actually, in a lot of cases, on the verge of suicidal thoughts. And it was a really harrowing time, and it really showed me just how detrimental low sick pay is. So when I checked back in with my colleagues, when I was thinking about the speech, I realised that many of them were still facing the same sorts of calls, restarting as we seek to live with COVID. What we're finding is that those people are still panicking. Those people still feel that they can't protect their friends and their family. So how can it be right that people who fall sick face a financial detriment? How can it be right that they're forced to go to work and possibly spread COVID? These proposals go quite some way to fixing that problem. They're not perfect. I would like to see statutory sick pay linked to an average wage rather than to minimum wage. But it means that if we pass this motion, that we can go some way to catching up with our European counterparts, because we have one of the lowest sick pay rates in Europe, and it means we can be prepared if another pandemic comes to ensure that people feel safe to stay off work and protect friends, families and colleagues. Thank you very much, and I hope you support the motion and the amendment today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I now ask John Ball to please stand by, and I call Naomi Taylor to speak against lines 69 to 70 in the motion. Naomi.
Lovely. Thank you. Good evening, conference. Please can I thank Sarah Olney for bringing this motion. The tourism and hospitality sector were probably the hardest hit during the pandemic, with the government ordering venues to close with short notice and little support in many cases. I'm a proud resident of Cornwall, where a significant part of our income is derived from tourism, so this motion is very relevant to us. I would like to speak specifically in relation to lines 69 and 70 of this motion to reintroduce 100% business rates relief for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors at least through June 2022, where I hold some concerns in relation to the small business rate relief option. Cornwall is one of the most popular tourist areas in the UK, but it also has one of the highest second home ownership rates in the country. This, combined with low and often seasonal wages, has meant for so many the dream of ever owning a house in Cornwall is just impossible. During the pandemic, like many popular tourism hotspots, we found that some second homeowners were exploiting the loophole in the government aid given to small business owners by classing second homes as a small business. In Cornwall specifically, they were able to claim over £104 million in COVID aid. Conference, considering that Cornwall has just had to concede £60 million in budget cuts, this was a hard pill to swallow. We are hearing of more and more hardworking families being issued with eviction notices because landlords can make more money through platforms such as Airbnb. On top of this, many holiday properties are being left empty through the winter when they could easily house people. The system favours the wealthy and punishes the poor, greed before need. Whilst the government has claimed they are now closing this loophole, it is a pretty flimsy closure, as the minimum number of days a property has to be occupied to be classed as a holiday let is just 70. The current planning system is weak and favours the developer, and I am concerned that the forthcoming Conservative planning legislation changes will make our housing crisis even worse. Whilst I am supportive of this motion overall, Conference, I felt strongly that I wanted to draw your attention to lines 69 and 70, as I am concerned that this risks being another loophole. We need to ensure that the Lib Dems prioritise first homes and not second homes, and that the small business relief rate loophole is immediately closed and we reclaim the COVID aid from those who did not need it and indeed should actually spend more for the privilege of benefiting from a second home in an area where there aren't enough first homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I now ask Eleanor Kelly to please stand by, and I call John Ball, who's speaking in favour of the motion as a whole. John.
Thank you, Chris. The hospitality, retail and leisure sectors are vital in terms of employment. Just hotels and restaurants alone employ 6 times as many people as agriculture and fisheries. They're clearly vital for our cultural life, from theatres and music venues to a night in the pub after a Lib Dem Action Day. Shops and restaurants are what generate the vitality in our high streets, and being born in Southport, it would be remiss of me not to mention resort towns. In Southport, the 2 biggest forms of employment are the hospitality industry, looking after tourists and day trippers, and retail, especially along Lord Street and Chapel Street. These industries are vital to the very survival of almost all our venues for physical conferences and many other seaside resorts and tourist destinations. And it isn't just small towns. Tourism accounts for 1 in 7 jobs in London as well. Government support for the hospitality, retail and leisure sectors right across the pandemic has been inadequate and unpredictable. Many hospitality and leisure businesses have been driven into bankruptcy because the government kept changing the rules at short notice, or because they simply couldn't afford to pay the rent during long periods of enforced closure. Many workers in these industries, from waiters and bar staff to technicians in West End theatres, were part of the 3 million excluded who fell through the cracks of the government's furlough and self-employed COVID support schemes. For instance, an accident of timing of whether casual workers were on the PAYE books of an employer on one crucial day determined whether they were eligible for many months of furlough payments, or they had to survive on subsistence level universal credit. Many small hospitality businesses trying to rebuild themselves are now being hit by staff shortages. Many workers are unavailable because they test positive for Omicron. Working at home isn't an option if you work behind a bar. And many European workers are no longer here due to Brexit. The combination of these 2 factors means that many bars and restaurants have to restrict their opening hours or menus, so are fighting to survive with one hand tied behind their back. The proposals in this motion, including providing a statutory sick pay rebate until the end of the year, providing help with improving ventilation and reinstating the reduced 5% VAT rate for hospitality, are the bare minimum that we need to save our hospitality and leisure industry. Finally, I welcome the amendment from the Young Liberals. Draft beer needs to be given a preferential duty rate, especially now that due to the pandemic, many people have got out of the habit of popping to the pub for a pint. So conference, please support this excellent motion together with the amendment and save our hospitality industry.
Thank you very much, John. I now ask Susan Baroness Kramer to please stand by to summate on the motion, and I call Eleanor Kelly, who is summating on Amendment 1. Eleanor.
Hello, Conference. I'm summating this amendment today, not only because it has been put forward by my brilliant colleagues in the Young Liberals, but because I've been pulling pints in local pubs since I was 16 years old. Working weekends in pubs has provided me not only with additional income while I studied and even when I had other jobs, but also with a safety net when I was one of the many young people made redundant over the course of the pandemic. This amendment isn't a particularly long one. Its premise is relatively simple. We introduce a preferential rate on draft beer. We help save our local pubs, allow them to make more money and employ more people like me when we need it. Current beer duty is applied equally. It means beer that is sold as a loss leader in a national supermarket is taxed at the same rate as a pint pulled in your local. This more refined way of taxing beer would not only help the publicans that serve it, but the small independent brewers who supply them, as they're far more pivoted towards supplying local pubs than global producers are. And so it fits in perfectly with Conference believes lines 5, supporting businesses and especially small businesses throughout COVID-19 pandemic is essential for the UK's economic recovery. And it really works to complement the wider motion. Let's make sure our party is advocating for the best policy solutions for our pubs and brewers as part of the wider package for the hospitality, retail and leisure industries. Conference, vote for the amendment and, of course, the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. I now ask Susan Kramer to please speak in summating the motion. Susan.
So thank you everyone who's participated in this debate. It's been brief, but it's been excellent. And I think it says something about the quality of the underlying motion, because it's one that reflects very much, I think, our Lib Dem values. And delighted to see the participation here and in the rest of the conference by our Young Liberals. You're our future. You really matter. Janie and Eleanor, just to assure you, we accept Amendment 1. And for those who are wondering that we've looked at this and there's no reason that it should undermine our commitment to minimum unit pricing for alcohol. This is a separate issue, and so we're glad to support the actions and the ideas that the Young Liberals are bringing forward, which will enhance pubs and provide some underpinning to important parts of our hospitality sector. What I like about the motion as a whole is it really doesn't shilly-shally, because the sectors that are involved in this motion are facing the most extraordinary challenges. And many businesses, especially small local businesses, are frankly seriously at risk. And as John pointed out, it also hits many self-employed people, many of them included in that 3 million that were excluded from help during COVID. And frankly, we never want to see that happen again. And it's a battle we're going to have to continue to fight as Liberal Democrats. But I am going to have a small disagreement with Sarah Olney in her description of this motion, because she said it was just as important as it was a few weeks ago. I would argue that it's more important than ever. Just when COVID seemed to have done its worst, the impending cost of living crisis has started to hit, with inflation pushed sharply upwards by a toxic combination of Brexit problems in the supply chain, the loss of EU staff, soaring energy prices, and the government's decision to cut universal credit and raise revenue by increasing national insurance contributions. And when ordinary families can't pay their basic bills, they don't go out to pubs and restaurants, they don't go and buy extras in the shops, they don't take holidays, they don't visit attractions or go to shows. And now, in addition to that, we have the tragedy of Ukraine. And undoubtedly, that will have an impact both on cost of living and on people's sense of wishing to celebrate. I also want to make clear that in many ways, these particular sectors represent a generational issue. And that's why I'm glad that so many young people have been engaged with this particular motion. Because the hospitality and tourism sectors alone, which employ 1 in 12 of the people employed in the UK, but nearly 44% of them, that's nearly half, are actually under 35. And if I look at retail, that employs about 10% of our employed population, but well over half are under 40. So this is very much an issue that impacts on our young people who are our future, and it needs much more attention than the government's ever been willing to give it. Now, this motion combines both a combination of short-term emergency measures and some long-term ones. And if I pick up the 100% business rates issue, Naomi, you're absolutely right. We have to deal with the abuse of rates relief, and that's part of our determination to tackle the underlying fraud issue. You're absolutely correct on that matter. And I wanted to say to Andrew, thank you for your very painful and disturbing real life example of the reasons why we have to tackle this sort of limited scheme of statutory sick pay and make that something that actually works for people and lets them genuinely, when they're ill or when they need to make sure they're not passing on COVID, it gives them that as an option without sacrificing their living and putting a further burden on their families. The very fact we're discussing these sectors at this conference highlights the importance of it to our economies and the serious challenge that it faces, as well as their importance as an employer or contractor of young people. And I want the government not to be allowed to say that it provided lots of support during COVID, so it has done enough. We still have huge challenges. There are crises pending in the future. The cost of living is rising as we speak, and we have to make sure that the underpinnings and protection that our economy needs, including these sectors, are put in place.
Thank you very much, Susan. Just before we move to a couple of votes on the amendment and then the final vote on the motion, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to Jack Worrell, who had a bit of a cheeky attempt to submit a procedural motion in the chat. Unfortunately, and very regrettably, that motion was not in order, but he's very welcome to resubmit it at Autumn Conference, where I'm sure it could be taken in one of the many Brighton's excellent local pubs. But unfortunately not in order this time. So let's go to a vote on Amendment 1. Conference, you will be able to find that in the polls tab. That should be open now, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes when we've got the result. Thank you very much, conference. The results are in, and 119 people voted in favour of the amendment and 11 against. So that amendment is carried. We now move to a vote on the motion as a whole, as amended. Again, as before, you can find that in the polls tab, and you're welcome to vote now. Thank you, conference. The results are in, and we have 139 people voting in favour of the motion and 2 against. So that motion is overwhelmingly carried. I'd like to thank everyone who put cards in for this debate. We were obviously able to fit everyone in. Unfortunately, we're ending a little bit early. I'd also like to thank my aides, Beck Scott and Nick DaCosta, and the team at Vivid, who've done a fantastic job behind the scenes to make this conference a reality. As we finished a little bit early, there will be a short break before we start the next debate. I'd certainly encourage you to drop into the exhibition in the meantime. Plenty of interesting virtual stands to visit there, from the ALDA party to Lib Dem Image, or visit Brighton, where you can book your accommodation for conference in the autumn, Jack Worrell. Beck Scott will be chairing the next debate on motion F34, COP27 and climate empowerment for local government, which should start in around 10 to 15 minutes' time.
Hi, this is Cara Jenkinson, and I'm one of the vice chairs of the Liberal Democrat Federal Conference Committee. This autumn, we're really keen to encourage new voices at conference. If you've not spoken at a conference before, now might be the time to give it a go. There'll be debates across a wide range of topics, and we're keen to hear from people who may have direct experience of the issues being debated from their personal lives, or perhaps have professional expertise that they can add. The first step is to look at the conference agenda. Once you've decided on the debate that you would like to contribute to, make sure that you put in a speaker's card by 5 p.m. on the evening before the debate is due to happen. I call it a speaker's card, but actually it's now an electronic form which you can access via the conference website. You'll need to put in a bit of information about yourself, about what you'd like to say and what you'd add to the debate. You'll hear back the evening before the debate if you've been chosen to speak. The conference team will schedule a short technical check and will let you know how to join the debate. We've put together a few short tips on writing a great conference speech. Bex and Duncan are here to share them.
Everyone prepares for a conference speech slightly differently. However, the aim of this is to provide
some general tips that can help you however you prepare. Firstly, some people will write out their whole speech and read it off, whereas others will read from bullet points. But regardless of which one of these you use, make sure that any facts you want to quote are accurately written down and clearly marked on your paper, underlined or highlighted if this will help you, because you want to be able to clearly and correctly quote them in your speech in order for them to give the most impact. Secondly, I always make sure I have at least one backup point, because you never know what the speaker before you was going to say. And if their whole speech is focused on one of the points you were going to make, it can be helpful to be not repeating that same point. And finally, 3 minutes isn't as long as you feel it's going to be. So don't try to fit 7 points into a 3-minute speech. You will either end up getting cut off halfway through, or you will be speaking so quickly that no one watching the debate will be able to understand the points you make. Pick the points you feel will fit best into the speech and focus on making them the best speech you can. Best of luck to all of you in your conference speeches in the future.
Hello, my name's Duncan Brack. I've been giving speeches at conference for more years than I care to remember. I've been asked to give you some tips on speaking at conference, so here they are. First, make sure you know how much time you've got. The maximum allowed lengths for speeches are printed in the conference agenda at the end of each motion. They're normally 3 minutes, unless you're giving the opening or closing speeches on motions or amendments. That means you can calculate how many words you can fit into your speech. An average person speaks at about 150 words a minute, but you might well want to go faster than that to give your speech pace and urgency, or sometimes slower, to emphasise your main points. But if you go too fast, your audience might not follow you, and if you go too slow, they might be bored. And if you run over your time, you risk being cut off by the conference chair. Either way, practice your speech in advance, record it and play it back to yourself to check whether it sounds okay and whether it fits into your time. Give a few speeches and you'll find the natural speed that works best for you. Second, write your speech out in the way that you like. I write my speeches word for word, which makes it easy to time them, but it does risk making them sound a bit stilted, though I think I can usually avoid that. Many people prefer just writing down headings or brief notes or using cards rather than paper. Whatever you feel most comfortable with will work best for you. Third, be absolutely clear about what you're arguing for and what you want conference to do. If you want them to vote against the motion or for or against a particular bit of it, tell them that right at the start, explain why, and then tell them again at the end. Don't waste time introducing yourself or telling them your life story unless it's directly relevant to your argument. You're there to persuade them to vote the way you want them to, so be as clear as possible about why. Fourth, don't get worried if you get nervous in advance. Everyone does, no matter how experienced they are. Take your nervous energy and put it into your speech. Giving a speech at conference is challenging and nerve-wracking, but it teaches you to focus on what you really believe and what you really think about the motion that's being discussed, and it gives you a real adrenaline buzz. So my final tip is, enjoy yourself.
Hi, my name's Elle, I'm Chair of the Young Liberals, and this is what we do.
There's a huge amount of organisational work that gets done by volunteers and local parties around the country, and making any of that sort of work even fractionally better has massive leverage effects. So there are, for example, around 400 local party chairs, around 400 local party treasurers, 400 local party secretaries and so on. So you can imagine if we're able to develop a tool or improve something that maybe makes one of those officers' job a little bit easier, maybe saves them an hour a month on average, that's actually 400 hours of people's time across the country every month that's being saved. There's massive benefits to be had from being able to make what we do a little bit better.
Welcome to Liberal Democrat Image, the party's official supplier of merchandise since the year 2000.
Hi, my name's Elle, I'm Chair of the Young Liberals, and this is What We Do.
Good evening, conference, and welcome to the penultimate debate of this conference, Motion F34, COP27 and Climate Empowerment for Local Government. You will find this on pages 86 to 88 of the printed agenda. There is also a drafting amendment, which is on page 88A of the online agenda. We have no moved amendments for this debate. Could I now ask David Chalmers to stand by and call Pippa Halings from South Cambridgeshire to propose the motion?
Conference. This weekend, we have discussed, debated and adopted policies on the war in Ukraine, that devastating war and our responsibility to those refugees fleeing that conflict. Climate change will bring about greater impacts than those Russian missiles raining down on cities, towns, coastal infrastructures, homes, and devastating livelihoods and even lives. And also, just as this Ukrainian conflict, climate change, if we allow it, allow global warming to go above 1.5 or 2 degrees, will hit the vulnerable hardest here in the UK and across the world. And that's what the international panel on climate change has made clear that we have even less time to act than was previously considered. And at COP26, that need to accelerate what we're doing was taken very seriously. And instead of coming back every 5 years to the global climate summits to report back and be accountable for what actions are being taken, also to ratchet up that ambition. But what's happening at the moment in the UK? Well, the National Committee on Climate Change has said that the UK is failing to meet its current targets. We are not on track to do this. And at the same time, the National Committee on Climate Change has said that the local government is able to be responsible and have an impact upon a third of all UK emissions within its sphere of influence, if it had the right powers and influence. But the National Audit Office and the Environment Audit Committee that just this last year conducted inquiries into the relationship between central and government and local government to achieve and allow local governments to do that, came back saying that there were serious weaknesses and a dysfunctional relationship between central government and local government that was hobbling this possibility. At COP26, it was only because of Lib Dem-led advocacy at national and international level, then through cross-party efforts, that we got local government into the Glasgow Pact, into the Glasgow Agreement globally adopted. Now we have 1 year up until November for COP27, when this government has to go and show what we've done, how we've met our targets, and how we're going to ratchet those targets up. It can only do that together with local action. That's local governments with partnerships with local communities. This motion sets out very clearly how that needs to happen. We need to have a clear framework of the roles and responsibilities between central government and all other levels of government, and the additional powers that are needed at local government level, so that we can really make sure that we are contributing to the national targets. We used to do this between 2008 and 2011. Local authorities used to report nationally on what we were doing, and the Tories scrapped that. So we need to bring that back in, and climate adaptation, being on the front line, as local government was in terms of COVID, on the front line, supporting vulnerable families with flooding, with heat waves, with our infrastructure. Put all of that into what we're calling a locally determined contribution, LDC, that meet the NDC, the nationally determined contributions of UK, as a global example of how we can accelerate ambition and make sure that we really do keep the world to a 1.5 degrees warming. Conference, before you, you will see that this also asks for climate empowerment of communities in decision making, of a large green skills programme, and that adaptation programme. We're accepting amendments that you've seen in the paper, which is about the green skills growth, which is critical to this, to make sure that it's part of building back greener and better from the COVID pandemic. We've just got 1 year as the UK COP presidency to show this global example. Be bold, show how the Lib Dems would make this happen. We are the party of localism, and together at scale, we can make this work. Thanks, Conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Pippa. Could I now call Oliver Jones-Lyons to stand by, and I call David Chalmers from North Devon to speak in favour of the motion.
Good evening, Conference. We're almost at the end of our 3 days, and normally by now I'd be winding down with a good drink. But this motion is really important, and I am pleased to have been called to speak in its favour. Many of you probably know me from my international work in the party as the chair of the European group, but I'm also a town councillor in Northern Devon, and at the end of last year was elected as the chair of the Devon Association of Local Councils, the body which represents the county's 380 town and parish councils. I'm aware this motion is primarily intended for our principal authorities, in Devon, that being the county and district councils, who do have a key role in tackling climate change, but so do our first tier of government. Sitting on NOUC's policy committee, I confirm that environmental and biodiversity issues are key priorities for our sector nationally. We share good practice ideas and offer guidance. Many town and parish councils across the country have declared climate emergencies, and to greater or lesser degrees are investing resources and finding ways to do their bit. Let me just give you an example. Where I live, we wanted to encourage active travel for residents and tourists. So my town council, when I was mayor last year, brought together several other town and parish councils in the area, alongside the two district councils for Devon and Torridge, to discuss how we could improve and open the new cycle routes. Eventually, the county council and local cycling crews joined the discussions. We all stumped up some money to have assessments conducted for our area on the suitability for more cycle routes. And now we are putting in bids for funding from central government. It was not easy, but my council wanted this to happen and have been the driving force. So we do have a key role to play. National and local government at all levels need to work together. And that story can be played out thousands of times across the country. And it's often driven by Lib Dem councillors. It's very important that post-Brexit, we continue to find ways to work with our European partners. And this was illustrated as towards the end of COP26, I was approached by the head of the EU's Committee of the Regions, concerned that the final protocol, there was no mention of the key partnership role of local government in reaching climate targets, which was going to be a step back from the Paris Agreement. Could the Lib Dems do anything to help? It just so happened, as Pippa mentioned, that we lobbied, and we actually got that included in the agreement. This motion takes the next step, calling for a more joined up approach from the UK government to engage with local government, devolve the power and resources that councils need to meet their climate adaptation priorities in preparation for COP27, which is just what we want. All I ask when referring to local government is that we make sure that we include town and parish councils in that discussion. Please vote for this motion. We need to be doing what we can at all levels of government to combat the climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Could I now call Stuart Reedway to stand by? And I call Oliver Jones-Lyons from Gateshead to speak in favour of the motion. Oliver.
Conference. 60% of young people are worried or extremely worried about the impact of climate change on their lives. That's why I'm absolutely delighted today to be speaking in favour of lines 64 to 66 of this excellent motion. It is no secret, Liberal Democrats, that local government has a unique and powerful role in the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss. Whether it be the role of individual councillors as leaders in their wards, or whole council action on issues like recycling or improving the sustainability of housing. In fact, Liberal Democrat councils and councillors up and down the country do take this role seriously. And that's why, for example, as I'm sure you all already know, many of the top councils for recycling are Liberal Democrat councils. But more must be done, and that's what this motion calls for. I must take some time to praise the excellent work that Pippa Halings does on this issue, whether it be representing local government at COP26, or even just on a more personal level, being an inspiration to people such as myself, young and old, to stay involved in the fight against the climate and ecological emergency. Now, as a younger activist, many older activists often take the time to tell us stories about how they got involved in either the party or wider political activism back when they were around my age. These stories usually have two common themes. Firstly, they are often inspired by big existential level threats, whether it's nuclear disarmament, protecting the ozone layer, or even campaigns against certain military interventions, such as Iraq. Secondly, the point at which they first got involved is often the local level, whether it was joining their local Friends of the Earth chapter, partaking in protests in their nearest city, or even being inspired to get involved in local politics more widely. The climate and ecological crisis is a story my generation will tell, at a time when many young people feel disenfranchised by a political class that increases taxes that disproportionately hit young people, ignoring our cries on the housing crisis, and pursuing damaging policies that harm the environment which we will inherit. Climate empowerment should be front and centre in our minds. Local government has a huge role to play in getting young people involved in politics, and this is our chance to turn a negative into a positive. Youth assemblies, educational programs, and community action projects specifically targeted young people might start the political journey for many disenfranchised young people. In 40 years' time, it might be the story a 50-year-old activist tells a new 18-year-old local party member. But it's not just what we do in local government that counts. It's what we do as a party at a local and national level. We must show visible leadership on climate issues at every level, especially when we aren't in power. It is this visible leadership which will recruit the next generation of activists, people like myself and many other young Liberals, who already form an integral part of the party at a local, regional and federal level and play a key role in every election. On that note, I also must encourage anyone, whether a young Liberal or a local party member who knows of young people in their party enthusiastic about fighting climate change, to get in touch with the Green Liberal Democrats. We're a party body who is here to support you, engaging with young members on this issue, and also on your own green campaigning. We have a lot to offer, and I'd absolutely encourage you to get in touch. Conference, let's continue to lead on the role of local government in fighting climate change biodiversity loss. Let's empower young people and inspire the next generation of political activists. Conference, let's back this motion.
Thank you, Oliver. I now call Imogen Shepherd-Dubé to stand by and call Stuart Redaway from North Hertfordshire and Stevenage to speak against specific lines of the motion. Stuart.
Hi, can you hear me? The motion is weak on specific. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
The motion is weak on specific policies to reduce greenhouse gases and seems to be mainly a call for greater involvement of local government in formulating climate policy. I'm not an expert on local government, but I find the motion abstract and rather incomprehensible, and so would like to ask some questions to better understand what is being talked about. Line 5, what constitutes, quotes, local area emissions? If all local area emissions are totaled, what percent is this of UK total emissions? Does it, for example, include the local area emissions, vehicle emissions, electricity used in local buildings, local public transport, longer distance transport by local people, local industry emissions, heating, insulating local buildings, using planning to minimize emissions resulting from new buildings and transport, educating people to give them skills to reduce greenhouse gases. Does it mean all greenhouse gas emissions in the geographical area covered by the local government are involved, by the local government involved? Where does a third come from that's in line 5? Line 6, what does place shapers mean? Line 9, this seems to be the only line in the motion that attempts to be specific about what local government might do. Line 12, what does net zero in a town mean? Lines 25 to 28, what have these got to do with local government? It doesn't seem local to me at all. Line 47, what are the needed powers and resources that are called for? Line 61, I think many readers will not know what DLUHC stands for. I looked it up. I think many readers will not know what ACE stands for in line 64. I looked it up. A final point, in view of Putin's war in Ukraine, should we accelerate our solar and onshore wind farms by somewhat relaxing planning rules? I suggest that people consider abstaining from voting for this unspecific and unclear motion to me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I now call Cara Jenkinson to stand by, and I call Imogen Shepherd-Dubé from Woking Borough to speak. Imogen.
Good evening, Conference. I have often wondered if this government is truly committed to tackling climate change. I see a lot of people talking about it, but very little real action. And it does not feel like there's a climate emergency at all. If this government has to have any hope of dealing with climate change, it must be done in conjunction with local councils, along with appropriate funding and the powers to make real change. These changes must affect and improve the everyday lives of our residents. As a local councillor, I have been particularly fighting alternative transport methods. Fighting for alternative methods. We just do not have the funding to build proper cycle lanes, improve bus services, train services, or just simply build better footways for walking, essentially to encourage people to leave their cars at home. Outside of the large urban areas, our public transport services are just appalling. Many people do not live near a bus or train service at all, and many of our bus or train routes do not run into the evenings or on Sundays, therefore leaving people with no option but to drive. While cycling is an option for some, the safe cycling routes are just not there for them. We must provide realistic alternatives, but that will require significant investment. And all of this must include making what public transport we have much more affordable for everyone to use. Our planning legislation and building regulations still do not require us to build new homes that are truly environmentally sustainable, with energy supplies that do not rely on fossil fuels. The National Planning Policy Framework and our local planning codes are outdated and just no longer meet our current needs. All of our new homes must be built with access for walking, cycling and public transport, without dispute. New roads, businesses and community venues should also have sustainability at their core and must include realistic alternatives to reducing the need to burn fossil fuels. Local council planning committees across the country need the powers to reject applications that do not do enough to tackle climate change without fear of it being challenged by expensive appeals, and they must have the backing of the local planning inspectorate. However, these changes should not stop with new developments. We need funding to retrofit services in older areas too. We need to help people insulate their homes properly and move to the modern era. Unfortunately, we cannot get the funding from developers to do this, so we need funding from central government to make this happen. Each council needs to be doing everyday things to tackle climate change and providing proof of what they're actually doing. This should include town and parish councils too, who are quite capable of installing solar panels on their community centres, planting woodlands and installing recycling bins in their parks. If this is an emergency, every council at every level should be involved in making that commitment. Conference, please support this motion. We need to push this forward. Local councils are willing to help, but we need the funding and the legal powers to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Imogen. I now call Vera Hobhouse to stand by, and I call Cara Jenkinson from Haringey Borough to speak in favour of the motion. Cara.
Thanks very much, Bex. I welcome this wholeheartedly, this motion that acknowledges the vital role that local government has to play in tackling the climate emergency. Since the heady days of 2019, when Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough and Extinction Rebellion dominated the news agenda, councils have stepped up to the plate. Most councils have declared climate emergencies, and over 80% of them have climate action plans in place. But the challenge facing us to decarbonise by 2050 is huge, and the terrible events in Ukraine are increasing the pressure to wean us off fossil fuels urgently. Unfortunately, we have a major shortage of the green skills that are needed to help us deliver zero carbon, which is why I put forward the amendment that you'll see in the agenda, which the mover of the motion has very kindly agreed to draft in. To insulate our homes, decarbonise our power supply, electrify transport and restore nature, hundreds of thousands of skilled people are needed. Local authorities are uniquely positioned to act on this agenda. They understand their areas and can play a leading role in bringing together local employers and colleges to identify the green skills gap now and in the future, and to put plans in place to deliver the training that's needed. Of course, central government does not make action on green jobs easy. Whilst the net zero strategy has some great ambitions, the government has failed to provide any certainty on long-term zero carbon policy and funding. And the Levelling Up white paper has been a real disappointment in relation to net zero. There's plenty about the role of the Medicis in the development of Renaissance Florence, much less about the job opportunities across the UK that an ambitious home insulation programme could offer. Government needs to listen to local authorities, and as this motion says in lines 61 to 63, the role of the Department for Levelling Up needs to be clarified in supporting local authority climate action. In relation to skills and jobs, local government must be represented on the Greens Job Task Force and the Greens Job Delivery Group that has been proposed by government. I work for a climate change charity, Ashton, and over the last few months I've spoken to many council officers about green skills. Councils such as Lib Dem Sutton that are teaming up with other southwestern London boroughs to create a Green Skills Academy. Or Devon Council, who are using community renewal funding to create green jobs. But for these initiatives to succeed and really scale up across the country, the government must do so much more and deliver on the promises that they've made. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Cara. And I'll call Vera Hobhouse, Member of Parliament for Bath, to make the motion.
Thank you, Conference. This is a fantastic motion, combining two of our Liberal Democrat ambitions into one great vision. The urgent need to get to net zero must go hand in hand with more power to local government. Cutting our carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 is a mammoth task. We Liberal Democrats devised a plan in 2019 to cut most emissions in the next decade and to get to net zero by 2045. But the Tories have no plan. While they try to convince the public that they understood that there's a climate emergency, they don't act as if there is one emergency at all. And I completely agree with Cara, who explained very well how national planning policy is persistently in the way of the local government ambitions. How when local government wants to do more about walking and cycling schemes, local government doesn't have enough power to do so. We need to urgently accelerate the pace of change, not continue moving at a pedestrian speed, allowing fossil fuel interests to dominate government action. Where is the commitment to set an end date to fossil fuel extraction? Where is the massive rollout of renewables, which should have started years ago? The current energy crisis and associated spiraling costs to households would have been far less severe if all the renewable projects that are in the pipeline for the next 10 years were already in operation. And many of our local planning authorities would like to do more about installing renewable energy installations locally, but it's national planning guidelines that doesn't permit them to do so. So where is the urgently needed improvement to our grids? We can't install locally, for example, fast charging points for EVs unless the grid takes a capacity. We can't trust the government in Westminster to be ambitious enough. But in contrast, many local authorities are. Local councils were the first to declare climate emergencies in 2019. Local councils are far better placed to know what works best in their local area. They know their local communities, and they're far better placed to bring communities on board. David Chalmers talked very passionately about a project in his local area in North Devon, which should act as an example of how well local authorities can deal with things, but how much better it would be if they had more powers. We need more powers to deliver in local government. This is why this motion is calling on the UK government to set a global example to provide the powers and resources in the UK's updated national determined contribution for COP27. Local government, the motion also asks to engage local government in the drafting of the National Adaptation Plan. We have heard so passionately from Oliver how young people need to be more involved and can be more involved. Their determination in putting us to shame, to dither and delay, it is their future at stake, and we owe it to them that they can have their say in the well-being and the jobs of the future. Local government knows best where our local jobs are at risk and where we can create these opportunities. This is why, Conference, we should include the amendments that Cara Jenkinson has put forward and talked to us about. So, conference, this is a fantastic motion. Please support it and support the amendments.
Thank you very much. We now come to a single vote on whether to accept the motion as a whole. So please go to the polls tab, which is under the subheading polls, or under the bar chart icon if you're using the app. You'll have 2 minutes to vote. Please vote now. Hello again, conference. With 159 votes in favour and 8 votes against, this motion has very clearly passed. I'd like to thank my aides, John Ball and Nick DaCosta. I now hand over to Nick DaCosta to chair the final session of this conference, F35. I would also like to say a huge thanks to the technical team who make all of this possible.
This is Ella, and we are here in sunny St. Louis, Missouri, campaigning for Brits abroad.
Welcome to the Liberal Democrats abroad.
We're campaigning for British nationals in Europe and around the world.
Local parties are working much more effectively as Lib Dems abroad.
We're the only party that has representation in Parliament for Brits living abroad.
In the House of Lords, whether you live in Europe or overseas, we'll look after your interests.
We're supporting British and European businesses, working together to overcome the Brexit hurdles they face.
Our scientists and engineers are world class, and we want to see them collaborating with our European friends.
Campaigning for overseas constituencies.
Pensioners abroad have been abandoned with their pensions frozen. We are working to put that right.
There are hundreds of Lib Dem members, supporters and sympathisers. We need to do our best to support them.
Working in hotspots like Afghanistan.
Come to our stand to talk about unlocking the potential of the millions of Britons living abroad who are soon to get the vote again.
Have a great day!
Welcome to Liberal Democrat Image, the party's official supplier of merchandise since the year 2000.
Hi, this is Cara Jenkinson, and I'm one of the vice chairs of the Liberal Democrat Federal Conference Committee. This autumn, we're really keen to encourage new voices at conference. If you've not spoken at a conference before, now might be the time to give it a go. There'll be debates across a wide range of topics, and we're keen to hear from people who may have direct experience of the issues being debated from their personal lives, or perhaps have professional expertise that they can add. The first step is to look at the conference agenda. Once you've decided on the debate that you would like to contribute to, make sure that you put in a speaker's card by 5 p.m. on the evening before the debate is due to happen. I call it a speaker's card, but actually it's now an electronic form which you can access via the conference website. You'll need to put in a bit of information about yourself, about what you'd like to say and what you'd add to the debate. You'll hear back the evening before the debate if you've been chosen to speak. The conference team will schedule a short technical check and will let you know how to join the debate. We've put together a few short tips on writing a great conference speech. Bex and Duncan are here to share them.
Everyone prepares for a conference speech slightly differently. However, the aim of this is to provide some general tips that can help you however you prepare. Firstly, some people will write out their whole speech and read it off, whereas others will read from bullet points. But regardless of which one of these you use, make sure that any facts you want to quote are accurately written down and clearly marked on your paper, underlined or highlighted if this will help you, because you want to be able to clearly and correctly quote them in your speech in order for them to give the most impact. Secondly, I always make sure I have at least one backup point, because you never know what the speaker before you was going to say. And if their whole speech is focused on one of the points you were going to make, it can be helpful to be not repeating that same point. And finally, 3 minutes isn't as long as you feel it's going to be. So don't try to fit 7 points into a 3-minute speech. You will either end up getting cut off halfway through, or you will be speaking so quickly that no one watching the debate will be able to understand the points you make. Pick the points you feel will fit best into the speech and focus on making them the best speech you can. Best of luck to all of you in your conference speeches in the future.
Hello, my name's Duncan Brack. I've been giving speeches at conference for more years than I care to remember. I've been asked to give you some tips on speaking at conference, so here they are. First, make sure you know how much time you've got. The maximum allowed lengths for speeches are printed in the conference agenda at the end of each motion. They're normally 3 minutes, unless you're giving the opening or closing speeches on motions or amendments. That means you can calculate how many words you can fit into your speech. An average person speaks at about 150 words a minute, but you might well want to go faster than that to give your speech pace and urgency, or sometimes slower to emphasise your main points. But if you go too fast, your audience might not follow you, and if you go too slow, they might be bored. And if you run over your time, you risk being cut off by the conference chair. Either way, practice your speech in advance, record it and play it back to yourself to check whether it sounds okay and whether it fits into your time. Give a few speeches and you'll find the natural speed that works best for you. Second, write your speech out in the way you like. I write my speeches word for word, which makes it easy to time them, but it does risk making them sound a bit stilted, though I think I can usually avoid that. Many people prefer just writing down headings or brief notes or using cards rather than paper. Whatever you feel most comfortable with will work best for you. Third, be absolutely clear about what you're arguing for and what you want conference to do. If you want them to vote against the motion or for or against a particular bit of it, tell them that right at the start, explain why, and then tell them again at the end. Don't waste time introducing yourself or telling them your life story unless it's directly relevant to your argument. You're there to persuade them to vote the way you want them to, so be as clear as possible about why. Fourth, don't get worried if you get nervous in advance. Everyone does, no matter how experienced they are. Take your nervous energy and put it into your speech. Giving a speech at conference is challenging and nerve-wracking, but it teaches you to focus on what you really believe and what you really think about the motion that's being discussed, and it gives you a real adrenaline buzz. So my final tip is, enjoy yourself.
Good evening, conference. I hope you're all well. We are now at the last session of this conference, and of course we want to end on a high, so we're ending on constitutional caretaking. This is F35, which you can find on page 89 of your agenda. There are no amendments, so we're going to go straight into the debate. Could I please ask Vicky Lax to stand by, and I now call Mark Pack to move the amendment.
Thank you, Nick. Conference Committee has, of course, saved the absolute best for last. Now, this sort of tidying up isn't glamorous, but it is important. It's a bit like making sure your insurance is up to date. Most of the time that doesn't matter, but just occasionally, my goodness, you wish you had it sorted. So, to take you through the 8 different areas in this motion. Firstly, lines 1 to 12, we refer to the rights of councillors in various places in the Constitution, and this motion makes clear that our directly elected mayors and elected police and crime commissioners, when we have them, have the same rights to take part in those key democratic processes too, as of course they should. Second, lines 14 to 20. There's a mistake in there about our Federal Audit and Scrutiny Committee because it's an appointed body, but there's a reference to by-elections. We've never had by-elections for that committee, and it's just a bit of poor wording left over from the past. So this change tidies that up. Next up, more significant change, lines 21 to 34, which is a simplification of the declarations of interest and register interest rules for our different federal committees. Currently, each of those committees does this separately, which makes the whole process quite inefficient. Multiple different committees have to decide on their own rules, several different registers have to be maintained, and if you're a member of more than one committee, you have to fill in multiple different forms. What these changes do is instead have a simpler, more transparent, less bureaucratic system that is used across the board. And the responsibility for that is clearly set with being with the federal board, so that conference as well can clearly hold the new system to account via questions to the board or indeed a business motion. So also making this new system more transparent. Then, in lines 35 to 57, there's a similar tidying up and simplification around our indemnity rules. Now, it's quite right that if somebody diligently and correctly does a role for the party, then we may wish to indemnify them against possible personal liability. Of course, if they fail to follow the party's rules and behaved irresponsibly, we might well not want to do that. So some flexibility is required. Currently, the way we do this is a little bit of a mishmash of different decisions made in different ways. So this change instead adopts the Scottish Party's approach, and thanks to former board member Sheila Ritchie for being particularly helpful with this part of the motion. So this change adopts the Scottish Party's approach, setting out clearly where the decision making rests and giving conference a new say over the limit on indemnities. So again, not only simpler, but more transparent, and again, making it easier for members of our conference to hold the board to account. Next, we have lines 58 to 72, which is some unfinished business from previous conferences. I've covered in previous board reports changes that we've made to simplify the working of Liberal Democrats Limited. All of that fitted within the wording of the existing constitution, but having made those changes, it's now possible to simplify the wording further and make it clearer so it more accurately and easily reflects current practice. Then lines 73 to 79 harmonise the 2 different descriptions that we have in different places in the Constitution of the sort of different types of discrimination that we particularly abhor. They've gotten out of sync over time, partly due to, at various times, one being edited but not the other. So this rectifies that. 81 to 83, those lines are a little bit of future-proofing against possible future electoral law changes. And lines 84 to 85, they are absolutely the very best lines of any motion at this conference, saved for the very last. So quite a lot there, but it's all about simplifying, tidying up, making more transparent, and therefore also making it easier for members and conference to hold people to account. I very much hope you will vote for these changes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Mark. Could I please ask Jenny Rigg to stand by, and I now call Vicky Lax, who wants to speak on lines 75 to 79. Vicky.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Good evening, conference. I welcome this move to bring the Liberal Democrat Constitution closer in line with equality law. I particularly welcome the unequivocal statement this constitutional amendment makes to acknowledge that sex is real and sex matters as much in political parties which have a responsibility for policy making as anywhere else. I note that we still have some way to go in our internal processes. For example, in a recent members' survey which set out to map the demographic characteristics of our members, there was no question about sex. Instead, there were 2 questions about gender identity. a concept which does not feature in the Equality Act and has no definition in law. While one of those two questions asked about gender, the answers offered were male, female, non-binary and gender fluid. They're placing sex with gender identity and fundamentally undermining the purpose of the survey. If we want to have a constitutional commitment to not discriminate against people who believe they have a gender identity, then there is no problem with that. But we also need to make sure we have the basics covered. Sex is a key demographic variable and a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. The fact that the Liberal Democratic Constitution as it stands technically allows for sex discrimination is cause for concern. I would therefore support this constitutional amendment, and at the same time, I would like to take the opportunity to recommend that the party undertake an urgent review of all of its internal forms and processes which currently refer to gender instead of sex. Last year, a document called The Political Erasure of Sex by Dr. Jane Claire Jones and research by Lisa McKenzie of MBM Policy Analysis and funded by Oxford University was published and circulated amongst parliamentarians. It describes itself as an overarching project which aims to document the process of political capture in our public institutions and how it is impacting the recognition and recording of biological sex in public policy, law, language, and data collection. In subsequent debates in the House of Lords, one of our peers referred to this robust academic work as stuff of conspiracy theories. Such a claim might have credibility if our party could demonstrate that we were in fact not complicit in the process. Please vote for this constitutional amendment to uphold the Equality Act within the party and to acknowledge the legal established concept of sex. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Could I please ask Neil Fawcett to stand by, and I call Jenny Rigg to speak for the motion. Jenny.
Hi Nick, thank you. I actually put my card in to speak in favour of this motion before conference because I figured it would be nice for me to speak entirely in favour of something when I'm well known as a troublemaker, particularly with constitutional motions. And I was going to make a really light-hearted speech with that in mind, but having heard the last speaker, I feel I need to pick up on a couple of the things that she said. This constitutional amendment is not doing what she says it is, and it's also not doing it for a very good reason, because sex and gender as legal terms are completely interchangeable. So the party is only doing what it says in the law. The other thing I would say is if she wanted to argue against what she is arguing against, she should have done it at the last conference, when conference overwhelmingly voted in favour of the kind of changes she objects to. So I may get into trouble for this, and frankly I don't care because I'm particularly tired of this argument. It's just completely wearing me down that these people do not seem to accept that they've lost. Anyway, vote in favour of the amendment, which is merely tidying up the language in the Constitution so that it all matters, so that it all matches in the different parts of the Constitution. And please completely ignore the last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jenny. I would now call Neil Fawcett to summate on the motion. Neil.
Thanks. Good evening, Nick, and thanks for all the work you and your colleagues have done on this conference. I think I'm making the last speech on this conference, which is interesting on such an exciting debate. Three quick points. Firstly, 20 years ago, I was helping to plan and run Dorothy Thornhill's campaign to become the first elected mayor of Watford. And it's quite remarkable that it's taken 20 years for us to tidy up our constitution so that it recognises that Peter and Dave, our two current elected mayors, should now be represented in the party constitution. So that's a good thing. Secondly, just to make the point that it is important that we tidy up the way we register interests, particularly those of us who are members of the various committees, in exactly the same way that residents in West Oxfordshire have the right to know that their MP and their Conservative Party have received massive donations from a Russian donor. In fact, the biggest ever single donation to West Oxfordshire Conservatives has come from someone with Russian links. It's quite right that Liberal Democrat members should be able to have an idea about what anyone involved in the party in any decision-making position might have as an interest if it affects decisions they're making. So I'm all for that. And in fact, I'd like to hope that we'll keep going forward as a party in terms of that transparency. The third small point is that as someone who often writes leaflets on behalf of Oxford West and Abingdon constituency and receives regularly missives from members in North Oxford in particular complaining about grammar, I was delighted to see that I'd be speaking in favour of an amendment that was tidying up some grammar in the Constitution. So those are three small points. The big point for me, though, is that I completely agree with Jenny, that I hope that whilst everyone will vote for this amendment, they will ignore the nonsense spouted by the last but one speaker. She's wrong in terms of the law, and she's wrong in terms of the principles of our party. It's just another attempt to have a dig at the fact that our party is quite rightly, quite proudly, and strongly standing up for trans and non-binary people. So please vote for this amendment and do it with heart.
Thank you very much for that, Neil, and thank you to the speakers. Okay, we're going to move to the vote now. As this is a constitutional amendment, or a package of constitutional amendments, it will require a 2/3 majority on the vote. Therefore, I would ask you to go to your polls tab, or if you're using the app, if you go to the bar chart button and go and vote. Thank you very much for that. Conference, I can announce the results of that vote. There are 154 votes for the constitutional amendments and 4 against. And that has reached the required 2/3 majority, so those constitutional amendments have passed. Thank you very much, everyone who took part. I'd like to thank my aides, John Ball and Chris Adams, and I now hand over to the party president, Dr. Mark Pack.
Thank you, Nick. Well, with that vote, we come to the end of our conference, and it's been a great conference with lots of important policy debates, some significant decisions about how our party is going to be run in the future, and perhaps most memorably and most movingly, that fringe meeting with Kira Ruddick earlier this evening. We also had the bonus, for which I think we should thank Conference Committee, of really knowing its audience here, of those live bar charts during our voting, which has certainly added a touch of fun in some of the close votes over the weekend. But there are obviously some really important thank yous to give before we wrap up. To all of the team in our conference hub, the staff, volunteers and the teams from Vivid and Quirk, a huge thanks for everything that you've done. And a special thank you to the Interpreters of Colour Network, who have provided the live British Sign Language interpretation all the way through conference. This is their first spring conference doing that with us, and the way they've adapted to some of our unusual jargon and acronyms has been particularly impressive. Thank you also to the team at Hopin, our software supplier, and to the conference and policy teams, both the staff and the volunteers on both of those, to our amazing stewards and the chat moderation team. Thank you to all the trainers, staff and volunteers who have put on such an impressive training programme through this weekend, and those also running fringe meetings and hosting exhibition stands, which really add so much to the overall conference experience for us all. Thank you also to everyone involved in running the experimental conference live. Up in York, I've heard really good feedback about how people have enjoyed having a chance to meet in person, alongside both great training from ALBC and taking part in our virtual conference. Of course, many other staff and volunteers have contributed in other ways, so thank you to all of them. But above all, thank you to you for logging in, for listening, for taking part, for voting, because conference exists to serve you, the party members. It's why it now is traditional. I'll end with a quote from Paddy Ashdown that I think so sums up your importance to our party, because you are the engine which drives the party, you are its force and its most important asset. So thank you, good luck and safe campaigning. Back to you, Nick.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. From myself and from the Federal Conference Committee, a huge thank you to all of the members who've made this conference so special and make my job as chair of the Federal Conference Committee so enjoyable. A couple of special thank yous we want to mention to Hannah, Amy and Luke, the team at Vivid, who plug us in, who are talking to us in our ears, who make sure we turn up on time and make sure everything's happening. A huge thank you to you, and to Chris Stan, of course, as well. The conference team have been absolutely fantastic, and without them and the hard work of the policy team, Christian and Joe, none of this would be possible. Huge thank you as well, obviously, to Leila and Kira Ruddick for the fantastic fringe session we had earlier. We will next have our meeting in Brighton in September, and I can't wait to see all of you there. And special bonus prizes to those members who may have noticed the moving carpets throughout the last couple of days. We have to do something to keep ourselves entertained whilst we're singing Baby Shark. So thank you so much, and see you in September.